Is WoW's class design getting better or worse? Welcome back to Marcelian&Flame. Today we will be having an open discussion with no scripts, just pure ideas that have kind of surfaced over playing World of Warcraft for the past 6 months or so, of course playing in the PTR as well, and watching the new class reworks. And we're not very sure where this class design is heading in the future for World of Warcraft and how this will actually impact the future of gameplay and the player base as a whole. So let's take a quick look at the current situation. We have in the live servers right now, depending on when you watch this video, specs like Red Paladin, currently the most popular DPS in the game and one of the easiest, if not the easiest specs to play. Just to preface this for the rest of the video, we actually think that it being easier, the game that is better than it being more complex. And Red Paladin is a good example of that. Ever since its rework in Dragonflight, its simplicity has been increased and the barrier of entry has been decreased, and it kind of hit a peak right now in the War Within, where you even have the talent that makes your wings kind of join together with your Wake of Ashes, and they're just like one ability on a 45-second cooldown. First of all, this simplifies the spec quite a bit, although it's not necessarily because it was difficult to press wings, but it comes as a package deal with stuff like Crusader Strikes or Crusading Strikes that takes away your Crusader Strike button from your bars. With Blade of Wrath or whatever it's called, where Consecration has a chance to pop on your Blade of Wrath target instead of you having to manually press Consecration, which that was a very good change as well. And on top of this, it's not like you don't have a lot of buttons. You still have Execution Sentence or Final Reckoning. You still have Hammer of the Light if you're playing Templar. You still have Divine Hammer, granted if it's still going to be good in the future. But you do also still have some dead talents. Opinions aside, it's clear that Red Paladin is actually doing better than almost every other spec in the game, and people really like playing it. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you have specs like Arcane Mage, Outlaw, Rogue, or Enhancement as well, which are more complex specs to play. Not only are they complex, but you actually need some external help to be able to play them. Outlaw Rogue is almost impossible to play without weak auras. Arcane Mage is almost impossible to play without reading a guide and understanding when you need to press your Arcane Barrage, since there's so many conditions right now. This might change in future designs, since it seems like every patch Arcane Mage gets changed, but most likely it's not going to be simplified to the level of Red. These are, let's say, good examples of complex specs that are fun to play, yet how likely is it for a Red Paladin enjoyer to actually swap to Arcane Mage? We would say not very likely, since it is like a totally different world unless you're just comfortable with using external sources to be able to augment your gameplay. This is definitely not going to be a new player-friendly spec, and it's weird because we still have these in the game. No, I have to say that I do like more complex specs, since they do offer more depth and more gameplay variety than a much simpler spec. But ideally, these things should be choices and not mandatory, which doesn't seem to be the case for either Red Paladin being a little bit too simple or Arcane Mage being a little bit too complex. And then we go to what's actually causing all of this issue, which is the Unholy Death Knight rework. People have been asking for the Unholy Death Knight rework, and as it came from Dragonflight to the beginning of the War Within, I have heard people complain that it's becoming too simple to enjoy. And obviously being simpler will make the current player base of Unholy DK kind of a little bit unhappy, but might attract a new player base, maybe let's say players that enjoy Red Paladin, to the actual spec, which probably is the goal, since the goal that the devs at least stated is to make the game more accessible, which is why we also have the war on add-ons. The war on add-ons comes as a package deal with how classes are designed, because you cannot have specs like Outlaw, Arcane Mage, or Enhancement Shaman that require weak auras to be able to play optimally in a world where add-ons are not necessary to play the game, because they kind of butt heads. So judging with that, we take a look at the Unholy rework. It is significantly simpler, to the point where Marcelian, myself included, and probably other Unholy Death Knights don't really enjoy the current playstyle, because this is a bad example of simple as opposed to what Red is. The bad example mostly comes down to the fact that you're losing the fantasy and the flavor of the spec. It doesn't seem to be there anymore in you summoning big hordes of undead monsters or having devastating plagues. They've been nerfed or passive or bunched up together into like one button, where it doesn't feel like there's any agency. When you press one button, you summon everything at once right now. It feels more like a mobile game spec rather than an MMO spec. So obviously there are examples of making simple good, which is Red Paladin, and making simple bad, which is Unholy Death Knight. And I'm not even going to talk about the fact that the feedback that the community has been given on Unholy Death Knight has kind of been just ignored. They just went a totally different direction than what the player base have been asking. And that's just very confusing because it feels like the scope and the future of the spec is not what the community wants or feedbacks, but a separate plan that Blizzard has. We don't know if this plan is going to affect other specs as well. If Arcane, Mage, Outlaw, or Enhancement are going to follow suit and become the level of Unholy. Once again, being simple is not bad, but if you start losing your fantasy, that's where a lot of people seem to be drawing the line at the moment. What is the future of World of Warcraft in a nutshell? Over the last couple of months, Marcelian and I have been playing a lot of alts from a lot of the classes, almost all of the classes. And the extent of our interaction with learning these classes has boiled down to copy-pasting the talent build and checking up the rotation and checking up the stats and then just firing the game and going into a dungeon or a raid or whatever we want to do. For some specs, it's becoming increasingly inaccessible for us to do so since there's 20 pages of data. I'm exaggerating a little bit for effect, but you understand what I'm trying to say. And although we have the experience and could potentially sit down, okay, let's actually see how this actually plays out, it becomes very difficult to do the more we play WoW because it seems like WoW just is starting to bring a lot of content outside of the class interaction that the player has. For the longest time in the past expansions, we have argued that the first interaction that the player has is with its own class and spec, and then everything else is secondary. Everything else when it comes to dungeon design, raid design, world quest, zones, story, cinematics, and all of that stuff. Now it seems that the class design has taken forefront, which is great, but sometimes the classes can be over-designed, and that takes away from enjoying the secondary aspects of the game. But now the secondary aspects of the game are so many when you have a new event every 2 or 3 months with 17,000 cosmetics. Maybe you want all of them, maybe you want none of them, when you can play a season in dungeons and you might be having fun, but then halfway through the season we get turbo boost, a boost in eye level, which was great, don't get me wrong, but that adds more things to do. And when you want to play a different class and start over, it feels like you're just not having enough time to learn all of this new class because there's so much stuff going on in WoW at the moment. It becomes obviously more accessible to new players, but at the same time complex in learning all of these classes, so it feels like something isn't quite right here. But this is how the game portrays itself to us. What do the devs actually think, or at least have publicly stated? Once again, the war on add-ons, as we like to call it, has started, and you can argue that it has started with Dragonflight whenever the edit mode has been added into the game to make your UI more accessible, more customizable, to move things around, where your minimap is, where your buffs and debuffs are, funny enough, to hopefully alleviate the necessity of using add-ons like weak auras that track a lot of stuff for your classes. And of course, we've had private auras, a failed experiment, but an experiment to outlaw weak auras as a necessary add-on for endgame raiding, so not to make new people feel like they need to install other stuff to be able to play the game. In the last couple of months, we've had a public kind of statement in an interview that they did that they want to make add-ons less and less necessary for players to play the game and make it more just like a quality of life thing. And add-ons that track combat situations like weak auras, tell me when, big wigs, DBM, and all of that stuff to hopefully be, they didn't say ban, but that's kind of where this is heading, so that they can also increase the scope of their encounter design and class design, where they don't have to consider like, okay, players will be using all of these external factors to be able to augment their gameplay and solve all of the puzzles that the devs are creating, whether it is a spell proc or a cooldown or a combo of abilities that you need to use to be able to perform and deal your damage. But obviously that's not happening for all of the specs, nor do I think it should happen for all of the specs, since there are still people who enjoy more complex specs. But when it happens to specs that completely change how they play, that can alienate player base, and is that something that we really, really want? Talents and hero talents are also a discussion that we need to have, because we have been purely opposed to the MOP or Shadowlands or BFA style of talents, the Excel spreadsheet that choose 1 out of 3. That works for what we call mobile gaming, where you just click on the one of the 3 shining options and then just go, where it doesn't feel like you're actually building a character to play in an RPG. However, the talents that we have right now seem to pose a lot of issues for the devs when it comes first to the class design and adding a simplicity to those classes, where you have classes like Arcane Mage, and for a new player looking at those talents, they won't know where to go or what means what, since there are talents spread around both to the left side, to the right side, that both affect single target and AoE, and it's not very clear where you need to go. Whereas you have classes like Red Paladin, once again, that has a more cohesive direction for the talents, where left side is clearly more oriented towards single target and right side clearly more oriented to AoE. You also have problematic talents like Beast Mastery and Marksmanship that need to put points into talents to do AoE, when Red Paladins don't have to do that. They get their Divine Storm by default in the game. So the class design is not consistent there. And then you can go all the way down to Druids, which have the most amount of problems when it comes to the talents, because they're sharing those talents with 4 specs. And the nature of the Druid is that you kind of have access to a little bit of every spec, since you can shapeshift into those specs. And these seem to cause more issues than solve. Then we have on top of this the hero talents, which probably solve a lot of the issues but don't offer any excitement when you don't have choices to make. You have a couple of choice nodes that are mostly related to some utility kit and some ways of doing damage, which people will just default to picking the one that's actually the best, but overall have not a lot of substance to them when it comes to some of the hero talents, like let's say the rogue ones, which it still boggles my mind to this day that they haven't been reworked, with them being one of the worst talents that have been designed in the War Within, and others having that rework already happen about twice for Hunter at the very least. And you have classes like Shamans, particularly Stormbringer and Totemic, that feel incredibly fun to play, that alter your gameplay at the moment. All in all, we wanted to have this discussion with you to see exactly where you stand with all of this. Do you think simpler is better? Do you think complex is better? Do you like it when your class changes from something like how Unholy used to be to what it is right now and what's going to be in Season 3? Are you a fan of the new Red Paladin rework and you would have never played the previous Red Paladin if they wouldn't have reworked it? Let us know in the comment section down below. And make sure to check this video, because fun or not, damage definitely matters. And we have made a tier list on predicting what the meta is going to be like in Season 3 when it comes to DPS specs, red included, and maybe that can alter what character you'll be playing, or maybe not. Maybe you just enjoy seeing those things happen on your screen. So click it right here.